Hi there, my name is Caroline Pally, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to use the manual settings on your camera. When you're doing photography, I know that it's really easy to go ahead and just put your automatic setting on your camera. And for the most part, this works most of the time. Your camera has all the equipment and all the technology to detect how much light it has coming in through the lens to understand how to appropriately, if I put this on auto, how to appropriately take a picture. But I think that there are times where you need to have manual control over what you're doing on your camera. So I'm going to talk to you about the 4 different things that you need to use in order to properly use your camera. There is your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and your flash. I'll talk about shutter speed first. Shutter speed is really important when you're thinking about the movement of your subject. So if it is stationary, or you're stationary, you don't necessarily need a very high shutter speed. So if I were to take a picture of a stationary object, I would do 1/60th or 1/80th of a second. And if my object was moving, I would do it much faster. So 1/125th or 1/200th of a second. This means that the shutter on the camera is closing at a quicker pace so that you can capture the movement without getting any blur on your image. Next, I will talk about aperture. So your aperture is responsible for your depth of field. So if you have an object very close to you, you're going to use a lower number. If the object's really far away, or you'd like to capture more objects in your foreground, middle ground, and background, you're going to use a larger number for your aperture. So this item is really close to me. I'm going to use an aperture of either 4.5 or 5. If the object was across the room, I might use an aperture of 7.1 or 8. This is also referred to as your f-stop. The third tool we're going to talk about today, your ISO, is responsible for how much natural light that your camera is reading through its sensors. So right now it's a little bit of a gloomy day outside, cloudy and kind of rainy. So I currently have an external light source to light me and light this room because it was very dark with my available light. But since I have this extra light right here, my camera doesn't need to compensate for the darkness in the room. So I currently have my ISO on about 400. If this room was very dark or didn't have a lot of available light, I would go up to my ISO of maybe 1600. So the higher that number gets, the more light the camera is naturally receiving. So I'm going to take a picture at this ISO. I'm going to increase the ISO to 800 just to show you an example. So on ISO 400, you're properly exposing your object, and on ISO 800, you're a little overexposed. For your shutter speed and your aperture, the lower your number, the more light you let in, so that the higher that number gets, the less light that's going into your camera because your iris is getting smaller or your shutter is closing quicker, so less light has time to get in. And when those numbers get higher, that's when you compensate for your ISO to go up as well. So if you're letting less light in through your shutter and through your aperture, you're going to use your ISO to help you boost that number and get some more light in the camera. The fourth item that I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be your flash. Your flash can be very helpful in low light situations, or actually in very bright situations outside. Anytime that your subject is backlit and you need to expose more on the front, or you want to get rid of shadows, it's really important that you use your flash so that you can properly expose what you're working with. I used flash on this because it is very backlit from my extra lighting source. There's not a lot of other available light, so I left my ISO at 800. It's a close object to me, so my aperture was on f-stop 5. And my object was stationary, so I left my shutter speed on 1/80th of a second. I hope that this information was helpful for you about using the manual settings on your camera. Thanks. Bye.
Happy shooting!